So good morning and welcome to day 4 of our Northamptonshire Health and Care Virtual Wellbeing Festival 2021. My name is Anne Linsell and I'm here today to facilitate the Stronger Together Poems from the Heart of the NHS session. And I know we're going to be in for a really interesting and creative session. I'm joined today by my colleague Dave and by other colleagues behind the scenes to ensure that Teams does what we need it to do. I know we're all very familiar with it, but we still can get glitches. So they're here to support in the chat and behind the scenes as well. So as I mentioned, we've all been very used to using Teams for the last 18 months, but just a reminder that for the moment we've got mics and cameras turned off for people that have joined us, but we will turn them on later in the session. You can use the chat function to share your thoughts, reflections, and in fact we will be encouraging you to use the chat function during the session. You've also got the opportunity to raise your hand as well. If you're on a device such as a phone or an iPad and you can't use the raise your hand function, but you want to come onto camera, just put something in the chat and we'll make sure that you can come on screen. For colleagues that are hearing impaired, you can turn the live captions on individually on your Teams. We can't do that for you, unfortunately, but you can you can only turn that on if you're on the Teams app on a computer. Again, phones, iPads and similar don't have that enabled yet. And finally, you will notice that the session is being recorded so that we can share the session onto the festival website so that colleagues haven't been able to join today are able to watch on demand, which is a really important part of the festival ethos, because we're all very, very busy in the partnership, and it's important that we make things as accessible as possible. So as I'm starting to lose my words, I will at this point hand over to Arabella. Enjoy your session.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Arabella Kurtz, and I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and joined NHFT fairly recently to lead setup of a new system-wide staff health and wellbeing service. And that service is funded by NHS England and NHS charities together in response to the pressures of the pandemic. And I should say that the poetry anthology that we're going to hear readings from today, which I'm going to, now can you all see that? I'm going to sort of push that there. The screensaver is making it difficult for me to show it to you, but there it is. These are the hands. The title comes from a poem by Michael Rosen, which he wrote for the 60th anniversary of the NHS in 2008. But that anthology, the proceedings for it, go to NHS Charities Together, which also funded the service that I'm setting up and developing in Northamptonshire. So just as a little prelude, bringing you this poetry session to think about our work of care, I came into health from an arts background. I read English and Russian literature at university. And for me, the arts and the work I've done all my career, helping people in psychological distress, engaging in therapy, have a kind of very natural synergy. They seem to me to be very strongly joined. And increasingly, I've tried to bring together my interest in the arts and my work in health. And I published a book a few years ago with the South African novelist J.M. Coetzee called The Good Story, in which we really tried to explore in a dialogue between a novelist and a psychologist the way that thinking about story, the way we represent our experience, the way we story it, could be of real help in understanding the therapy process. Now, it's my belief that language how we talk about our experience, the words we find, the metaphors, the stories, the poems, has a real part to play in recovery and in sort of coping with our lives, really, with representing the raw experience and particularly psychological distress. And I think that during the pandemic, we've all really seen this, because one of the things I've noticed is that when we get together and we try to talk about what we've all been through, we struggle to find words. And what you'll find is we're very often falling back on stock phrases, aren't we, that just don't seem adequate in conveying, in making sense of all that we've been through. So what I'm really pleased to do today is to welcome this group of fellow travellers, healthcare colleagues and also poets who are really interested in getting beyond the stock phrase to try to find words for the work we all do in healthcare. And in doing so, I think, to discover new meanings and create sort of therapeutic possibilities, but above all, to pay testament to the human interactions that take place every day in our work. So if I can briefly introduce the poets who are going to read today, and of course you'll get to know each of them a little bit better as they read, and they'll tell you, I think, something about themselves. First of all, Deborah Alma. Deborah, do you want to raise your hand? There you are. Deborah is a poet and a teacher of creative writing at Keele University. And she has, I think, a profound belief in the power of poetry to help and heal, and is the founder of a project called The Emergency Poet, which offers poetry on prescription, that's what I've read anyway, from a vintage ambulance, which I'd quite like to find a photograph of. I'm sure there's one available. Welcome, Deborah. Katie Amiel, who's a GP working in Hackney in London, and has an interest in the arts and medicine. And together with Deborah, Katie co-edited the These Are the Hands anthology, which I held up earlier. And all of the poems that are being read today are published in that anthology, which I recommend to you. Katie, will you raise your hand? Welcome. Steve Griffiths, who's had a career as a public health researcher and is also a poet with 8 published collections to his name, the most recent of which is a pamphlet published by Fair Acres Press called Upland. Steve, do you want to raise your hand? Welcome. And last but very definitely not least, my Northamptonshire clinical psychology colleague, Kaj Roof. Kaj, will you raise your hand? So Kaj is a consultant clinical psychologist in NHFT, and she's leading setup of the Complex Trauma Service, a new service in our county. And Kaj is also a published poet, and I'm very pleased to say she'll be reading a couple of her own poems, which are very much about empathy and the clinical encounter towards the end of our time together. On that note, we're going to move now to the readings. And Deborah, you're going to start, aren't you? Over to you.
I am. Yes, thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Arabella. And thank you so much for inviting me here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. To start with, well, just to sort of update you, I've actually sold my ambulance, sadly, and now I run a poetry pharmacy of physical premises here in Shropshire, doing the same kind of thing, but this time with cake, which is even better, I think. But And my connection here is rather tenuous because I've dressed up as a doctor and pretended to be a doctor with nurse first, so I feel a bit of a fraud. But I do have a poem in the anthology because my mother was an SEN nurse, and I don't look mixed race, but she was from Pakistan. So this poem is called "My Mother Describes How She Would Wash the Bodies." In my country, she says, we wash the bodies 3 times. They must be family, and only women for the women and men for the men. First time with water and plum leaves. Second, the water is with kapur, and last time, purest water. Then a bag with dried rice to close the eyes, a scarf to hold close the mouth. When I come to this country, she says, in your NHS, I must to wear stockings and show my legs and wash all the bodies, sometime 7 or 6 together there in room. And sometime they make tiny movement. I catch with my eyes an arm falling or fingers tighten, and the skin is fragile like paper and weeping. And then the sighs and hisses. On the walk to the nurses' quarters, the men watch my legs in stockings and go back to where you came from, Packy. And I tell them we are headed to same place, skin same purple and grey and gently weeping. This next poem is from paediatrician Rennie Lang, and it's called Birth. I sit in my dark office, see sharp shadowed spikes of exotic palm slung against stone walls by noon-drunk sun. I am waiting for a baby, not mine, you understand, that is not part of my contract, but the baby of the woman who lies gasping, unheard, unseen, around the corner. Her baby sits, cheeks cradled in the basket of her pelvis, not knowing which way to turn, not knowing that the correct way to enter the world is to look both ways, then go head first. Too late to turn now. This baby listens to the pained panting of its mother's heart, feels the roof of her diaphragm tapping fast staccato beats onto the small wet tuft of its hair like urgent rain. Its feet are cold. This baby, you understand, is not my responsibility, not yet. I am not the midwife. My hands do not slide slippery and slimy up between the redness of thighs, the warm something poured into a metal bucket on the floor. I do not touch the small white toes resting in the perineum. Lost it, sorry. In the perineum, as if waiting for a bus which is late. I only watch, do not move, do not clang together forceps like giant tongs lifting the grey morsel out into the still world. He, for now that we can see that it is a boy, lies naked on my towel. He is an unfolded nautilus, still dreaming under the sea, listening to the slow thud of his mother's heart, the pulse of the mask on his face, the quickening beat of my heart, of my breath, as I try to reach his will to live. I push each square digital second into his waiting chest, time clinging like mucus to my fingers. At last he coughs and breathes. His tiny eyes open and watch. His heart flutters delicately under the membrane of my stethoscope. Now I sit in my dark office, pushing words out with patient contractions of my pen. Somewhere in the hospital, a mother breastfeeds. I write. The next poem is from Vicky Thomas, another paediatrician. It's a short one this time. Labour Ward Prayer. Give us this day our daily miracle. Exchange our offering of sweat and tears, and most of all of blood, for new life, crumpled as a new leaf bud. A child is like a pearl made of pain, and as we sweat the spiral through again, there's something holy in this moment now. The mingled prayers and blasphemies, I can't become I can, become I must, because all life hones down into this single point, the baby. And here at last she comes, high perfect cry, eyes closed against the light. Triumphant, exulting, I wash my hands and leave. They need me for the miracle next door. This next poem is Sometimes Things Get Heavy on the Night Shift by Leo Marie Dragstedt, student medical health nurse. Speak of loneliness, how your bandages bind you up tight like a paper doll hug, how people are always up for a fight, but that they don't like to sit through recovery that ends in better but not fixed. How you've been lying on disposable sheets so long you feel a little disposable too, that you still see the skyline when you close your eyes, but hear more monitor beeps than birdsong. You say the lights below your 4th floor window look like stars to you now, as if you've already crawled your way to heaven, but that it can't be, because in heaven you can get a full night's sleep. You say you prefer a view that overlooks the train tracks, that you imagine walking along them and never looking back, that you imagine walking barefoot, that cold metal is better than nerve damage, but that you can have both in a wheelchair. You say that hope outside of its packet can get stale in hospital rooms, and your lips are tinged blue when you speak of all the beautiful lives that have touched you. But your words come out black and purple till the whole room is tender as a bruise. Then you steam up the window just sighing and dreaming and wipe it all away to keep watching as your alternate lives curl up and burst into lights and disperse like old friends into the night. It's over to Katie now, I think.
Hello, thank you very much, Deb. The powerful poems and just giving it a moment after you've read us those few.
So thank you, Deb. I'm going to read a few poems from a section of the book which is called Unseen and Unsung, and it felt really important to us when we were putting together this anthology to give a voice to some of the staff in the NHS who we very rarely hear their stories, but are absolutely critical to the working of the NHS. And this first poem is called The Gondoliers, and it's by Anna Bosanquet, who's a midwife, and it's about hospital porters. The Gondoliers. They are the unsung heroes. Just watch their skill, their strength, their agility and grace. They are proud, they are independent, they don't like you helping them. They are macho, they are charming, they have golden rings and medallions on their hairy chests, earrings, brow rings and tattoos. They have big muscles and they sing beautifully while balancing the beds with professional splendour. They are the hospital porters. They are the gondoliers of the NHS. This next poem is called Leaps and Bounds, and it's by Lorna Faye Dunsire, who's an occupational therapist with acute mental health services in her area. Leaps and bounds. We share this space, here and safe. She talks of knots and silence, her past creeping up on her, tying her down, taking her voice. She asks for little, a place where her demons aren't pressed up against her. She spent years dislocated from herself. Cruelty has pushed her till she's fixated on pills that numb, cigarettes searing skin, alcohol dulling the ache within, a blade to cut and any stillness the noose might bring. So we plan her escape. I tempt imaginings of a future fate. She craves a cocktail of understanding, calmness, and adrenaline to medicate her internal raging. Together, we take time to play. With trampolines, we bounce away the trauma into a single moment of okayness. She's more than just a survivor. Not fragile, this ferocious young woman is whole but hurting. Our hearts are thumping. We are breathless and so perfectly normal. And so perfectly normal. She belly laughs. The next poem is called Invincible, and it's by Roshni Bihari, who's a consultant in rehabilitation medicine. Invincible. I think of the little girl who will wear this spinal jacket, its candy pink hardness coated with butterflies, forcing her kyphotic spine into conformity. Clasped between its two halves, like a turtle shell, it will keep her protected from the taunts of others. Cripple, hunchback. These names will bounce off her new suit of armour like ricocheting bullets. Inside, she starts to grow, straightens like a sapling seeking the sun. She begins to feel invincible. And my final poem is covers, sorry, I'm losing connection a bit. My final poem covers a topic that we also felt was really important to cover in the anthology, which was about
we can still hear you, Katie, so if you want to just carry on.
Hello, sorry, I'm back again. The final poem covers something that we thought was really important to cover in the anthology, which is about the impact of care on health professionals and what happens when we too become unwell or distressed by the work that we're doing. And it's called Burnt Out, and it's by a public health research fellow called Emma Halliday. Burnt out. He grew skin like armour and steered conversation to fend off attention. As hours started blurring, his friendships unravelled, relationships crumbled. He battled the feelings, would never acknowledge this wasn't his failing. Then nights began burning, he drained wine like coffee to cope with the next shift. He clipped on a work smile, and colleagues remembered him never complaining. When anyone queried, he stiffened the face mask and was always fine, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Katie. Before we move on to our next two readings, I wonder if we can just pause for a moment, because we've heard from you, Deb, and from you, Katie, as co-editors of this anthology. And I've got various questions, I suppose, but one I wanted to put to Deb was just a question about why you think poetry is good in an emergency.
It depends on the emergency. Not sure about medical emergencies, but I think, well, for me, the process of working with poetry on prescription is first and foremost about listening and listening carefully. So it is a kind of semi-serious pastiche of a kind of therapy session where I ask questions, but they're not about the drugs that they're taking or how many times that they've been to the toilet, but how they look after themselves, what the things that they love to do, the books that they like to read, to remember the person as the positive part of that person when they are at their best. So I think then when someone's in crisis, if you've listened carefully, hopefully there's a poem out there where someone has been there before and has come through in some way and has found some resolution. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it does. I mean, it's something I think we could talk about for a long time. But I just wanted to ask it because people would sometimes think that poetry is just a luxury. It's not for those crisis emergency times. But actually, you're so right that listening carefully, taking time to think and with language can be just what we need when in crisis, although it sort of feels a bit counterintuitive at the time, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a very intimate thing. I think it speaks as though directly from one person to another, and you know that's as deep as it gets, I think, and certainly not a luxury.
Katie, thank you for the poems you read. We just got a couple of minutes before we move on to hear Steve read, but I suppose I wondered, it's been, you know, the anthology came out last year and it's a very unique contribution. I just wondered, you know, what reflections you've got on it a year on, you know, in how it's been received, what it's sort of offered to healthcare professionals.
I mean, I think we published this anthology just before the onset of the pandemic, and we had no idea at the time how timely it would feel and the importance, how increasingly important it would feel to actually give a voice to staff across the NHS. And so it sort of took on a bit of a life of its own, because also, of course, Michael Rosen, whose poem These Are the Hands starts the anthology, became life-threateningly ill with COVID, and his poem These Are the Hands became a sort of anthem for the NHS and was put up in hospitals, put next to his hospital bed, graffitied onto walls. So it became even more poignant, I think, and important, the book. And as I say, it sort of took on a life of its own. And I think for the staff involved in the anthology, who were going through incredibly difficult times in their work and personal life throughout the pandemic, the community that sort of arose out of the book and the support they got and the positive feedback they got about their poems became something hugely important and positive in their own lives as well.
Yeah. It's this business we're talking about of beginning to find words for extraordinary experience, which your book has sort of, I think, taken into a very particular territory for those of us working in care. I just wanted to say, before we move on to hear from Steve, as you'll have seen, the poems are being put up in the chat, and we would encourage you, because we've got a bit of time at the end, to post any comments or questions into the chat so that we can include you in the discussion after we've heard from Steve and Kaj. Steve, please can I invite you to read your poems?
Thank you, Arabella. I'm going to start with one of my own poems. And though I'm someone who's written profiles of health inequality, I'm also a human being, and I'm the husband of a patient. And this is a poem to say thank you. And there are many ways of saying thank you that are very necessary. And I think saying thank you is healing, both for the thanker and the thanked. This poem's called Cutting Edge. Another surgeon for another part of the body sees horizons, then closer, slight realignments, standing on the shoulders of fallible people. He says it could go either way. He doesn't know. This morning, through unrivaled skill, through trial, mirror, error, smoke, and chance, where steel and plastic meet with tissue, there are rainbows in the mist. How did he do it? Every day will contradict the last, until through repetition there's the not quite accidental smooth water. Every day some gift. The trick's to notice it. He nods and passes by. We owe him one. And the next poem is by Beth Calvary, who was a poet in residence for an NHS hospital trust, and the poem's dedicated to the Bristol Royal Infirmary Intensive Care Unit, and it's called Other Side. They often call us lucky, and we rarely ask them why. After all, we did survive the lightning strike of borrowed time, the lottery of worried smiles. And so we nod politely, they're only being kind, but it doesn't feel so lucky when you're on the other side. It's true, the threat has dropped its hold. A breath held in too long unfolds. Tomorrow lets its maybes mould. Yet still, the waves of worry cling, the aftershock that lightning brings. With each electric threat we faced, we felt our quiet current change. The once familiar is somehow strange, and no 2 days awake the same. Trauma isn't black and white. It doesn't keep within the lines. We need some time to breathe again, to let the future snuggle in, and practice naming shades of hope we learn to summon colour with. Today, we'll hold our journeys close. We'll wear our faces how we like, and soon the strength that isn't luck will fill our bones with gentle light. And next, I'm going to read a poem by Sam Guglani, who's a consultant oncologist. And it's called Fingerprints. Look at how we start like fortune tellers at the hands. Here by the window, where ward meets world, I examine this man's, turn them over like found leaves. They're remarkable, creaseless, a baby's. Glass palms reflecting my own, now white, now brown. He laughs at my surprise. A tree surgeon's hands, he says. My skin pressed into other life. It's bark and blood, just like you, Doc, I bet. Your fingerprints handed to others. His hand shakes in mine, shakes mine I listen to his heart. Not scared, he says, not of this anyway, but maybe, look, of that daytime moon, the lit rock of it, what it is, what it means we are. Oh, those starlings, did you see this morning, against the sky like flung dust? I think our bodies are this, that we merge really, collide and become the breath of others. Here, he says, go on, have a whiff. My fingers drum his chest. Did you hear those sounds, he asks, from that comet, like whale song, mermaids? The ship they landed, its name, what? Philae. It means end or place's edge, some frontier where things meet. That girl on my street told me when I dropped her £1. She's like you, dark-skinned but sudden cold. Will you see her now on your rounds? Listen to her? It's these distances I regret. Enormous, tiny, their harm. I shine a light in his ears. Hard now to tell which of us is speaking, where the voice comes from. One of us says thank you. I go to wash my hands, but seeing them in the water, stop, turn, return to him. And the last poem I'm going to read is by Anne Gray, who's a nurse, and it's called Without Us. I am washing up a saucepan she thinks she's using to boil milk. I am an intruder in her kitchen, unnecessarily cleaning everything that's sticky or has left a rusty stencil of itself inside the pull-out drawer. Her voice is rising to a shout. Get out! I want to bite you! You can, I say softly, and it's forgotten. We return to chocolate in 2 faded cups, to cutting cake, to finding forks and saucers. So much shorter now. She peers into my face. Are you, she hesitates, Anne? I say, I am. I'm your eldest daughter. Of course, she says with a little laugh. Neither of us believe I've convinced her. She wants to watch the washing machine and has dragged a chair there. The constant movement must be soothing as she's happiest waiting for the green light beeping under open door, even though that instruction can be baffling on a bad day, and there are more. Sometimes she'll whirl about the house causing mayhem. On other days, we'll find her upstairs in a room she says her mother left her when she died, turning pages of her Bible, talking softly to herself while she watches tops of trees move against the window. Lost there, she's 4 years old, without her father. She weeps, searching for his clothes, his shoes, his overcoat, his hat. He will need them when he goes out on his visits. It's so little what we can do to be there, where she is, without us. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Kaj, can we turn to you?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Arabella. So I'm going to be reading 3 poems. I've been invited to read 2 of my own from the anthology and one by Sam Guglani. The first poem I'm reading is called Care, And I wrote this in response to hearing about social care workers being paid by the minute and not for their travel time. And I was very angry about it, and I wondered what it does to the caring relationship. Care. 1. This touch is warm and makes me human. I wash your back softly. Rainbows flicker on filmy bubbles. Liquid silver lights your skin underneath. I see the cogs of your spine, trace the groove of your shoulder blades. History not yet written in your bones. This touch is warm and makes you human. I will make space for you, as wide, as deep, and as unending as you need. You will fit. 2. We must make hard choices, tough decisions. We must create a new landscape where the clock ticks. We must package efficiently, pull tight, and be fit for purpose, with targets translated through the prism of spreadsheets and calculations. Our fates will be determined by distant constellations. 3. I am paid by the minute. The clock ticks. Each visit should take half an hour, including travel, each spoonful pushed 5 seconds, each wash 6 minutes. In this job, it's important to know long division. Traffic's been bad today. This old lady's new. Haven't got time for a slow one. Hurry up. Haven't got time to chat or listen to you speak or weep. My clock's ticking. You won't see another winter. Hurry up. Take off your top. I'll flannel your back. Don't make me late. I'm paid by the minute. The clock ticks. You will fit. 4. My bones are brittle, my skin translucent, but I feel. I was born with only a heartbeat and cry, yet she cradled me, and her love was a lullaby. Now what they send me doesn't account for the loneliness of watching dry light arc the heavens from sunrise into night. I'm cold. I yearn for warmth, a familiar voice, a touch that's kind, someone to wash my back, to hold me in mind. I won't see another winter. The clock ticks and nothing waits. I am lost. Remote stars write my fate. Who should cost my time's value to me? Who says how much I am worth? Who sees me as I am or once was? Who is there to care? And my next poem is really about the emotional impact of the work we do, that so much of it is about relationships, but we put things into different languages, into boxes, which create kind of tension when you're working with emotion and with people. And sometimes that the work doesn't fit into work hours. Sometimes we metaphorically have people come home with us. Contact 2. I sit at the computer to make notes, fingers hovering over the keys, must find a way to digest and describe the contact. Navigating drop-down boxes, finding languages, each script has its purpose, a syntax of suffering, clusters, symptoms, negative thoughts, risk. An hour becomes a paragraph. Note, there was distress. She was tearful. Actually, she cried. Tears rimmed her eyes, then overtopped, brimmed and spilled, and she cried and cried. While speaking, tears coursed down her face. Her cheeks were ruddy, her hands clenched. I offered tissues. I listened. She was crying and talking and crying like she was finding the keys on a glass piano, searching for harmony in hammered chords, fragile and new. The room found its note. She stopped and looked out of the window. It was snowing. I companioned her silence, waited. Snowflakes swirled, filling the wordless places. We weathered it quietly, without catastrophe. As she left, she made good eye contact. A bouquet of tear-stained tissues tumbled from her hands into the clinic room bin. They fell like crushed white roses. She left her fingerprints everywhere. I press save, switch off the computer, ignore my cold coffee, rush home for the kids. Later, I'm stirring dinner on the hob, absent-minded. I drift in that space out of time, and her tears come back. Her tears, and my own come then. And the final poem that I'm reading is Consultation by Sam Guglani, who's a consultant clinical oncologist. Sam's poetry is beautiful, and I can't speak on his behalf, but I can say that I chose this poem for how it holds great emotional weight, and its simplicity, and its sense of the eternal. Consultation. I note again your death today, surfacing steadily against your skin, like mistletoe made visible in winter trees. We talk past it and you walk out to where leaves applaud in the breeze. Take flight. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kaj. I'm not wanting to rush into sort of busy talking, if you know what I mean, because it does feel like we've heard some quite a variety and depth of statements in these poems. And it's just something about absorbing them really and sitting with them for a bit, isn't there? We would like to involve participants. If you would like to take part in this discussion before we finish. So will you put up your hands if you'd like to put a question or make a comment to us as a group or to any individual. And I hope Anne and Louise, you can let me know if I can't see somebody and we want to bring them forward. Kaj and Steve, I was just thinking, if I gather my thoughts a bit, that what the poems that you've read really convey to me is the sort of the opposite of the kind of othering, if you like, that we so often see in our health services. You know, so often when we're working, the language we use and the services that we work within make a kind of divide between doctors, healthcare workers and patients. And that's just blasted through by these poems. And the Guglani poem, particularly Fingerprints, you know, this kind of interaction where you don't even know who's speaking. And I have to say from my own therapy practice that I do quite often have that kind of experience. Sometimes it can be a lovely experience of connection, a deep experience of connection. Sometimes it can be something very disturbing and confusing, where you sort of feel lost in the work. I wonder, Kaj and Steve, what your thoughts are about, I suppose, about how hard it can be in our daily work, in the services we work in and the language we use, to sort of be reminded of our common humanity and the relationship and the connection we have that I think is what draws us to the work originally.
Yes, I was very struck particularly by Kaj's poem, her use of those quotation marks to denote official language, and official language is something that people take refuge in for their own safety, in a sense, you know, facing up to the reality of daily life, of, you know, a lot of suffering as well as a lot of joy, of course, and we have to remember that and hang on to that. But it's a real challenge, you know, which is why it's so important to have a well-being service. And there are you know, a lot of hurt people out there. And that relates to, you know, what I was saying about saying thank you, because there are so many people that we've encountered in so many different ways, and there are so many different ways of appreciating them, and that's part of my project in trying to understand what's going on.
Thanks, Arabella. It's a really interesting and helpful question. And I think for me, there's something about many of us are in health and social care because we have a calling, a vocation. And how do we measure heart work? How do we measure that intimate relationship that is at the core of healing? And I think there's a real tension there, and that these languages of the intimate connection and the measurement of what we do don't really speak to each other as they should. And I think for me, I have a passion for the arts and poetry, because I think it opens up that intimate experience that Deb was talking about at the beginning and really humanises us.
Kaj and Arabella, and ladies and gents, we do have a comment in the box that I'd just like to read out from our own Anne, if you like, and it's thanks for sharing a couple of these poems. They've really struck a chord for me, so thank you very much. And I think when we look at the chat box, and I think it's silent for a reason, that a lot of people are probably reflecting. And I was just listening to it, and I sat here. I'd been out in my garden earlier on just for a walk round, and the very last poem, the very last part, it says, "To where leaves applaud, in the breeze take flight." And I thought that's amazing, because my background is I'm ex-military, and for me today I was thinking about the start of the First World War. And right today in my garden, the reason I went out is because my first poppy came out. And I was just thinking that when we say goodbye, and when you sometimes walk and see these leaves drifting off, or you go, it's sad because they're crunching under your feet, my mind always goes, but there's always new life and there's always hope. And I really like that final part of how it struck a chord with me. It made me think, it made me feel. And I love how you feel, because it links to those emotions that not just go here, but they go here as well. I'm just going to see if there's anything else in the chat box.
David, I think we've got Sam Beattie, who's commented on, I think, very much liking the phrase heart work. Oh, sorry, that's Sam, that's different. That's Vanessa Volpe, but Sam, you've joined us to take part. Welcome.
Sorry, super late.
Don't worry, we've got time. Sam, is there something you'd like to comment or offer?
I'm sorry, I've literally joined 30 seconds ago, so
okay.
I'm playing catch up.
Yeah, okay. I'm confused. I thought you were being put forward to take part in our discussion.
No, Catch knows me. She knows that if I had joined longer, knowing me, I would have had something to say.
Okay.
Hi,
But I
Sam.
think but I want to just offer this comment from Vanessa, who loves this phrase that CADs use, heart work. And I would say that something that I've learned really in setting up this staff health and wellbeing service and in speaking to colleagues from all different parts of the sort of, health and social care, is I've had a renewed sense really of the work we all do as a labour of profound love. And been so struck really by how much of ourselves we give to the job, and the sort of meaning of what we do. It's really given me a renewed sense of admiration for my colleagues, I'd have to say. I suppose what I want to put to the poet is a sort of question, which is, given how much we care about what we do and how rich it is in sort of human meaning and interaction, why do you think that it is so difficult to talk about in the professional sphere? Why are we stuck for words in that sphere?
I think we're occupationally trained to be very self-reliant, and not necessarily to speak about the work that we do. I think in psychology as a discipline, we're more used to talking about that, that in our work. But even there, I think there have been limitations around lived experience or sharing too much of one's own kind of the emotional impact on one's own self. And I think there are these real unmapped zones of experience, which I think the anthology has really shone a light on. That people do feel stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So it's been interesting for me because I am outside of the NHS. I'm the lay person, and it's been interesting for me. I think it's been really important that to see how human and frail and vulnerable that people are behind that professional persona, and I wonder if having to maintain that persona, obviously with your patients and clients, but also amongst each other. I mean, is there pressure to remain invulnerable in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Deb, and I think even more so in the pandemic, with us all wearing masks and these kind of labels of hero NHS workers, which is very nice in many ways, but actually sort of sometimes forgets the fact that we are all fragile and vulnerable human beings, and that we go home to our lives and have to face just the same challenges. There's this I think what you said about the poems highlighting our shared humanity and the not sort of trying to moving away from the them and us thing, I think has been really really important, and that's why we felt the chapters Only Human and also a chapter called The Other Side was so important actually in this anthology.
Yes, I think it's a question that needs to be applied to every single working place, because there are things about the way places are managed and the language that is used by managers, but also about a space opening for people to talk in the way they can talk at home or with friends. And that people need to have that opportunity to talk in that different way without hiding behind a kind of armor of language. I mean, that's why I'm a huge believer in this anthology. People have said it ought to be in every waiting room. I think it should be in every office and every workplace.
Steve, I can't think of a better note on which to finish. Unfortunately, we are on our time. David, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I could listen to you, ladies and gents, all day. The voices and your tones are so calming and beautifully read. And I'm sure on behalf of everyone else who's reflecting, you know, we can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing this with us. I'm just going to share my screen, ladies and gents, and sort of bring this session to a close. Hopefully I'm sharing the right screen. My computer is having a... Oh, there we go. Yep, I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, so feedback is a gift. There's no such thing as failure, only feedback. But to make, you know, please go on to, if you've got the smartphones, you can use the QR code there. And it also puts you into the entry for our free prize draw for the goodies that you can see on the screen there. Unlike the TV, we don't charge you £2 a minute or anything like that. So it is all free across the whole system. So please do that, join in. Give us feedback, and you've got to be in it to win it, which is always a great phrase. There is lots still going on. You can see on the calendar in front of you now. We've got more going on this morning and this afternoon. Lots of live sessions, lots of other discussions going on. And tomorrow as well starts with the gardening all the way through to, once again, some good keynote speakers. So please share far and wide and join in where you can, and share with your colleagues who may not have access to this, that it is all being recorded and is available on the staff room. There are challenges going on behind the scenes as well. There's a step challenge that you can join in on. There is a download your, or tell us about what your song of the week has been. And there'll be some sort of compilation soundtrack that might make it into the top 10. We never know. And there's the picture challenge. OK, and I think today is looking down and nature. So I've been out and uploaded my poppy picture today because it's nature and I took it looking down. But please join in with these, and once again, get them onto the socials and share them. And on the website, there are lots of free resources, so please go and use them. Resources are only good if we actually use them, so they are there. Go and grab them. Once again, it's not just about for you yourself. You can share them with your colleagues, your friends, your family, and so on. So please go on those different social media devices, Twitter, Insta, as they say, Instagram or Insta for short, Facebook, and you can use the hashtags Northants Wellbeing or hashtag VWBF 2021. So please get on there and share far and wide. And lastly, even sit and reflect in and listen on what the ladies and gents just talked about there. You know, it took me back to some of my military time, if you like, and difficulties in the past. So if you are feeling like you need some support or help, then on the screen there, please contact these different numbers that are on there. But also remember, you've got each other, you've got your line managers, your supervisors across the system. Please reach out. It's okay not to be okay. It's not okay to do nothing about it. So please, if you've been affected by anything today, please reach out and ask for help. That is it from the team here. I'd like to thank the ladies and gents for presenting and sharing all that. It's been an absolutely amazing session. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, but please join in later on, and thank you very much for joining us across the system. Thank you.
Thank you.